This is a show where my dad and I talk about work and how to enjoy it, and we also provide a weekly housing market update and provide a quick answer to common mortgage questions. Please enjoy the Dirty Troughs Podcast from Cleveland Street Mortgage. Alright, thanks for watching the Dirty Troughs Podcast, episode 2. Today we are going to get into discipline a little bit, but first we're going to start with our mortgage question of the day and a quick market update. Dad?
Yeah.
How do you budget for closing costs when you're getting a mortgage?
Yeah.
And then what should people expect, and how do they know how much to budget for those?
No, that's a great question, and really it's kind of part of a broader question is when you start thinking about getting a mortgage, you know, the number one first thing you need to do is to meet with a mortgage professional and establish a plan. Because it's hard to answer that question in the abstract, you know, because it depends on what kind of a loan you're getting, you know, and it depends on, you know, how much cash do you have. Are you willing to take a higher rate? Can you afford to take a higher rate? Because that will mean lower closing costs, and that will drive your closing costs down, the total amount of cash you need. So it really is a question that should be answered in the context of your specific situation. Now, you know, having said that, generally there's two main components to what are called settlement costs on your official loan documents.
So real quick, just in case there's anyone very, very new watching, there's you know you have to budget for a down payment, but on top of your down payment when you're getting a mortgage, you also have some additional costs for various reasons that you're going to have to pay for your loan. So those are the closing costs that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. And there's really two main components of that. There are your transaction costs, which are the fees you pay for the people who are providing you services to get your loan. There's an appraiser involved, there's title companies involved, there's escrow companies, there's lenders involved, there's credit reports involved. And so there's all of these different elements, and all of those people get paid. No surprise there. And so those are your fees that you're paying for services. And I would just rule of thumb, and again, this matters, you know, it really does matter. You know, are you buying a $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 house, or you're buying a $3 million house? Those numbers will scale a little bit. But, you know, let's say you're allowing for, let's say, around $5,000 for paying fees for those services. And then the other component is going to be not transaction cost for services associated with getting your loan, but cost associated with owning a property that you end up having to finance through the loan process. And that includes things like real estate taxes. Typically you have to fund a certain number of months real estate taxes. Now that's not paying extra real estate taxes, that's just paying the real estate taxes associated with the property that you either already own or are going to own. But typically you have to fund some months of those through the closing process. Same with homeowners insurance. You have to fund some months of those. And so generally I would add another $5,000 for prepaid.
That's very average.
Very, very kind of rule of thumb. But again, you know, I think the most important thing you can do, and that's if you want to buy a house in 2022, if you want to buy a house in 2023, now is a great time to meet with a mortgage professional and just go through. You know, they don't charge you for meeting. They don't charge you, and there's so many things that if you know ahead of time can help to optimize the outcome down the road. And so I definitely would advise that.
Okay. And those costs are not included if you have a 20% down payment. That extra $10,000 that he's talking about is not part of that 20%. You have to pay that on top of your down payment.
That's right. So if you're buying a $100,000 house, who knows what that would be? But if you're buying a $100,000 house, that would be $20,000 plus $10,000. So you'd have to have $30,000 available to you in order to do that transaction.
Great.
Good clarification.
Great. Quick mortgage update for the day. What's going on in the market? Is the market favoring any group, sellers, buyers, investors right now?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely continuing kind of to see that rebalancing from that super hot seller's market that we've been in for such a long time. You know, we had that superheated seller's market, and you know, as just about everybody knows, that has been cooling off for some time, and it's a much more balanced market right now. So you're seeing a lot more properties that are sitting for longer. So if you were a buyer who got discouraged, who kind of got on the sidelines because too many cash offers, too many offers that you were competing with. There was just never a property that was around long enough to consider. This is a time where you can make a careful, considered evaluation of a property that's on the market and still perhaps get that. There's properties that have been sitting longer than 30 days. And most of the time those properties are going to reduce their price as well. So you might even be able to go in there. The other thing to be aware of, something that's really popular right now is either temporary or permanent rate buy downs. A lot of sellers are offering concessions for you to buy their house, and basically they'll pay a significant amount of money up front to buy your rate down. So maybe you can get the rate down significantly below where the current market is. And so those are there's a good time. It's a good time to consider.
Got it.
Yeah.
Great. And rates are generally.
Yeah, right now, I mean, you'll see Fannie and Freddie quote just over 7, kind of the low 7s, and that's probably reasonably accurate, kind of across the board. Like right now, today, if I price out a just for a sample scenario, $750,000 purchase price, 25% down, 740 credit. My rate is 6.75 with an APR of 6.870, and so so you can still get, if you go with a good mortgage broker, you could probably still get in the high 6s, but generally you're going to see anywhere between the high 6s and the low 7s right now.
Great. And the general, if you haven't seen any of our other content, we don't know. No one knows the future. No one can predict the exact timing or if it's going to happen. But we listen to smarter people who know the general economy, who tend to think that over the next 6 months, maybe to a year time frame, those could start to come back, even back to where they were 6 months ago in the 4s.
Yeah, some people are quoting that they may, we may see that, and that's kind of tied to, what the Fed is doing right now to aggressively clamp down on the monetary supply, which is widely believed to produce, recessionary results, and that will depress demand, and that will tend to lower interest rates. So like Landon said, nobody knows, nobody can guarantee that at all, but there are some very smart people who I think are reasonably hoping that we'll see at least, rates get in to the 5s, the mid to low 5s, and maybe even lower than that, in the next 6 months to a year.
Well, we don't have to dwell on this too long, but my immediate thought as a buyer would be, okay, why am I buying right now then? Why don't I wait? What are your thoughts on that?
Right, and well, I think that, it all has to do kind of with what you said earlier, never knowing kind of how to predict the future. It's, we all knew what it was like when rates were really low. And the demand was exceedingly hot, and it was very difficult to buy, and there were very many people. I have several clients who been in the market for a very long time and swung and missed many times because it was just the competition was too hot. You felt like you had to go way overbid for a property, and so I think that obviously everything has to do with timing. I know people who made a lot of money buying property when everybody thought it was a bad time to buy, because maybe it's a seller's market, there's more property, but there is more property, there are more deals to be had, and you need to buy understanding that could be your forever interest rate. So if you finance it now, I would never recommend that you buy depending upon the rates to come down within 6 months or a year in order for you to be able to afford to make that payment. I would never advise that. What I would advise though is if you can afford to make the payment, to go ahead, that's a reasonable risk to take right now to buy a property when there's a lot more property to be had, when sellers are willing to deal, and perhaps getting in at a time before they go up again, and then perhaps being able to refinance to a lower rate down
Awesome.
the road.
Great. So topic for today is we are going to get into discipline, and the reason I started thinking about this is because Dad has consistently woken up very early, as long as I can remember. Generally, is it 4:20? Is that when you're waking up right
roughly.
now? 4:19.
4:19.
4:19. Who knows why? But yeah, you do. Yeah. And it stuck out to me for a long time that I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to wake up early because I see the value of being able to wake up early, and and make the most of your morning, and I work better in the morning, but I have a hard time doing it, and I know there's a lot of people in a similar boat, and I am familiar with the idea that if I want to be able to do a hard thing for what I know is good, then I need better discipline. And so that got me interested in discussing the topic of discipline. So we want to talk a little bit about what it is, why it's valuable, and how you can build it, how you can practice discipline. So we were talking a little bit about how to define discipline, and it's hard. Obviously, you can take the dictionary definition, but in terms of what we're getting at, it's difficult. There's different ways to go about it, but we came up with some possibilities. Do you want to get into those? Definition?
Yeah, I think for our purposes, we're not talking about, discipline in the, punitive sense, where, as the context makes obvious. But we're talking about like an activity, an exercise, or regimen that is repeated over a period of time that develops or improves a skill. So you are.
So that's your definition.
Yeah.
You want to repeat it?
Yeah. So it's an activity, exercise, or regimen that's repeated over a period of time that improves or develops a skill. Right. So you're doing something repeatedly over time. And you're doing it consistently because it's developing a skill that's a desirable skill for you to have. So in this context, I think that's. Do you have some other things to add?
And we got into this a little bit. I reached out to some friends who I respected for their routines, their habits, their discipline, and asked them their thoughts. And something that came back pretty consistently was the power of discipline to bring freedom. And as I was thinking about that, we kind of talked through why does it bring freedom and how does that connect to the definition. The definition I came up with was exchanging short-term pleasure for a long-term good. It's the ability to have foresight and let that foresight inform your current actions and forego a current pleasure, which could mean you actually have something good that you want to do that you don't do, or it could mean, in a sense, something hard that you don't want to do that you do. And so overall, it's the same idea, and the definition I came up with was exchanging long-term pleasure or short-term pleasure for a long-term good.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And there's two sides of that. And I think you kind of brought them both out. It's consistently doing what is hard but beneficial, or steadfastly avoiding what is enticing but harmful. And I think those are two things that you brought out very well. And you brought up the idea of liberty. Some of your friends kind of referenced that. And we all have this kind of tyranny of the urgent. We've kind of heard of that, where we do the thing that's most urgent, not the thing that's most beneficial. And I think that's the idea of liberty here. We have the tyranny of the superficial. We do the thing that's easiest to do, but is very superficial and not very valuable, not very rewarding, instead of doing something that has much deeper and long-lasting and greater value. Because it requires a lot more forethought, kind of as you talked about. And so I do think there's a liberty there's a liberty to pursue the most valuable things, the better things.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I want to get back to, because both my two people that I reached out to also mentioned sleep as or waking up as a immediate act of discipline that they've worked at, and that's how I started thinking about it with your discipline. And I want to get back to that, but we'll come back to that when we start thinking about how to actually build it. In terms of the value of discipline, why is it a good thing? How have you seen it bring value to people, to yourself, and practically, realistically speaking? Obviously, in theory, it sounds good. But in real terms, where have you seen the value of discipline? Yeah,
so I am I am not a fastidious exerciser. I'm not a fanatic about it, but I value exercise. I'm 61 years old now, and it's important that I maintain some level of activity. And so, the way I started getting up early, I think maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but I think you know what I did. But the reason I got up early is, we had 5 kids, five young kids. You were the youngest of 5. And it was important for me to exercise. I wanted to exercise, but I also wanted to be here at breakfast every morning. I didn't, this was way before COVID, when you actually went to work. So you got in your car and you drove to work. And so, I wanted to be here for breakfast every day. I had 5 kids and didn't want mom to have to do that on. I didn't want to miss that time either.
So the alternative was go to the gym.
Yeah,
go on your way to work.
On the way to work.
Then go to
shower,
work.
Then go to work.
Before we're up, basically.
Before you guys were up, or and again, we didn't have all these flex schedules that we did now, so I had to be at work at 8, and work was 30, 40 minutes away, and so I would have had to either skip exercise, skip breakfast with you guys, or be to work late, and I didn't want any of those, so I wanted. So that's when I started getting up early. So I said, okay, the Y opens at 5. I'll be there right when they open up, and I will get done, get showered, get back home in time when you guys were just coming down for breakfast. And so that was, and that achieved many different things. That discipline of working that in. On the immediate, the immediate benefit was I got to achieve all 3 of those things. I got to be with you guys, I got to do exercise, and I got to get to work on time. And so those were all important. But maybe on the kind of more to your point is now these 20 plus years later, I'm still doing that. I get up. I get up early. I exercise early. It's just even though I could go later now, right?
Is it hard now still to get up at 4:19?
For some reason, not at all. It's almost, I don't know.
Was it then? Do you remember it being hard initially?
I think it was just building that routine. Is once it got into your routine, then it was just when you got up. And I think I know there's a concept of a morning person, and who's one, who's not one. I guess I am one, because it was never that hard.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, and that, there is something to that of your, whatever the physiological reason for it, or you in some sense you're a morning person, you like the mornings. It's not as hard to make that, maybe it wasn't as hard initially, but at the same time, it sounds like there was some period where, at least a few days where, you had to make yourself do it.
No, definitely. Yeah, I do think that's true.
And that gets to something we mentioned a little bit earlier before we start filming is when you want to build habits, discipline is crucial at the beginning stages, and then the habits themselves become valuable, but in the building of the habit, discipline is really crucial to get that going. And it sounds like, now it's not even a second thought, it's not much of a challenge, it's a habit.
Alarm goes off and it's time to get up. So,
which is not the case for me.
I
wrote a challenge to myself one time, I think during sophomore year of college, of maybe freshman year of, it was just kind of hitting me of how that I was setting the tone for my day to start by hitting the snooze. To start, the first thing I had planned to do, I didn't follow through on. Literally the very first thing in my day. And aside from just losing the time that you wanted, that you needed, that you wanted to use, you're also setting the tone for your day of the first thing you said you were going to do, you're not doing. And that sets the tone throughout the day. I'm not in the habit stage yet in terms of not hitting snooze, but working towards that. So to that end of working towards that, if there is someone like me that wants to build discipline, wants to practice it, what would you recommend? How can you practice it? How can you build towards that?
I do think there's a book that I gave to you recently called Atomic Habits.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he has some good ideas in there. I'm not totally on board with everything he writes in there, and I don't want to come off as an expert on this stuff either.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not by a long shot. I need this as much as anybody, more than most probably. But I do think, that's super important that you're defining the desirable outcome. Because it kind of goes, and that's just another word for goals, right? I don't want to use goals because it's kind of cliche in a way, and some people just, they've tried and failed so many times at setting goals. I'm gonna count myself in that. Maybe that term itself is too negatively loaded, but I think just define a desirable outcome. What is the outcome? Because there's no motivation in doing something for the sake of doing it itself. Of getting up early for the sake of saying I got up early. There's just no motivation in that. What is it that is desirable?
I mean, going back to our definition, they were variables. I'm going to go back to mine because that's what I remember. But they were all some variation of exchanging a short-term pleasure in favor of a long-term good.
Right. Yeah.
So start with that long-term good.
Right.
Don't just have a vague sense of this is something I want, but define it.
Yeah.
Define the desirable outcome, you're saying.
Yeah.
And then work from there. So how do you work from there?
So you define desirable outcome, and then you have to define one or more factors that will move you toward that outcome. Right? So that's the thing that you're going to be disciplined. Let's say you want to lose weight. Let's take an easy one and a very popular one. You want to lose weight, and that's the desirable outcome. So what are some of the factors that, I'm going to eat less. I'm going to exercise more. Those are two things that are pretty common in people's regimes that are working toward losing weight. So first you desire, what's the outcome? You have to define that. You have to have something that's really more attractive to you than the superficial pleasure you get from just doing the next simple thing in your life, of overcoming the hard things and doing the hard things, So then you have to define one or more factors that will move you toward that, and then you have to establish a routine, whether it's a daily or a monthly or a weekly. You have to establish some kind of a routine that will move you toward those, facilitate those factors. You define, okay, here are the factors that I need to establish. I need to eat less, I need to exercise more. And then what are the routines, that I'm doing? And then just create some sort of accountability. And that can be self-imposed, self-monitored. I think you mentioned, the idea of, I'm going to take away some pleasure of myself. If I don't do this, I'm going to take away a desirable thing.
And I think that's where the disconnect is. I think plenty of people are okay defining the desirable outcome. Plenty of people are even okay figuring out, these are the actionable steps that are going to get me there. But I don't know if it's the current climate, or if it's just kind of the biggest challenge in that process is when the moment comes where that specific thing that you've defined you need to do comes up and you have to make the choice. We just don't have the ability to choose the hard thing.
Right.
And one tool that you're talking about is, find a way, find some sort of specific tool, accountability, to make you more motivated in that moment to choose the right thing that leads to ultimate long-term good. And I think for waking up early, this is something I've tried. Is one of my favorite morning routines is coffee. It's just really hard to wake up at all, even if I know I'm not going to have coffee. And so if I've set sometimes up where if I don't wake up, if I do hit the snooze, if I don't wake up when I said I'm supposed to, then I have to wait till a certain, till 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. to have coffee. And usually that's not enough. I have to tell someone else I'm going to do that. because if I just tell myself that, then in the morning I find some way to excuse it.
Yeah.
So yeah, setting some sort of accountability is where the rub seems to be of where I mean, you're waking up early scenario you didn't seem to have to set up anything. It was just you were motivated enough in that moment. It might be different person to person, thing to thing, goal to goal, but I think a lot of times that's where it comes down to is can you set up a form of accountability where you're going to follow through on that.
Yeah, no, it's super helpful to me because I mean we're talking about one area of my life that for whatever reason it's been so much a consistent part of my life for so long that I don't remember how hard it was, whether it was hard or not to get that going or not. But I can think of a dozen things that I'm not doing right now, and so it's super helpful for me, to think about, okay, am I serious? And if I am, then I need to set some accountability, around those things.
Yeah,
it's super valuable.
Good. Yeah, and I think it's still discipline when it's an area that comes easier.
Yeah.
But you have to have that third measure, that accountability measure, if it's an area that's just that is not going to come, or you've tried before and it doesn't come, then you're going to need some sort of system.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the power of habit. Kind of what I think you talked about that earlier. Is that this is, become a habit, and so it's just not hard for me at all. I don't need accountability. I don't need, I don't need to work at it. It's habit, and so I do think there's an encouragement there, that you can take something that is difficult and make it a habit, and it really does become not difficult. It just becomes habitual, and you don't have to think about it. It's having to think about things. I think that can create the barriers to actually doing them.
That's really good.
And I do think there's an element there too that I, speaking to myself again, is that I think when you are trying to achieve some sort of level of discipline in your life, it's really important that part of that discipline is planning to accomplish the discipline. Because and sometimes it's just the different levels of complexity involved. But for example, to bring this round to mortgage, for example, if one of my pillars of our company is to be constantly learning, right? I want to be a learner. I want to be constantly learning so that I can constantly offer better service, different products, better guidance to clients. Then I can't just wake up every day and go, okay, I want to learn something today. I really need to build into my discipline the discipline of planning what I'm going to learn. So I think there's an element of saying, okay, if I'm serious about this, then I'm going to be a learner, and that means on certain day of the week, let's say Wednesdays, I'm going to spend 1 hour just learning a new product, learning a new aspect of underwriting, learn whatever. I'm going to learn something. I need to identify that the week before. So I think part of discipline is planning. If you plan, then you won't have the excuse or the inefficiency of going, okay, now I'm ready to do my thing that I'm committed to doing, and now what is it that I'm going to do, and then something distracts you, and there goes that week.
Yeah, and it's good. It's for things like that. It's hard. It gets open to the question of what's more important in the moment, and a lot of times the easier thing is going to seem more important. But we're going long. We can wrap it up. But on your comment on turning something into a habit, the power of habit, I generally, the way I wake up in the morning is the night before. I'll figure out kind of what time frame I need, and before I need to be somewhere, I need to do something, and I generally change the time day to day. And I think it will become a lot easier to get up if I just commit to making a habit, even if that means sometimes I have some extra time, more than I needed, and it eats into my sleep a little bit, or just the power of habit there. If it's a consistent time every day, then I have the ability not just to rely on my discipline long term, but to rely on my discipline to get me to the point where I formed the habit of 4:30, 4:45 every day, or whatever it is, and using discipline to build a habit, not just relying on discipline long term.
No, I think that's sort of inherent in the idea of discipline. It's not it's not as circumstantial. It's not impacted by day-to-day circumstances. It's something you're doing day to day because the impact of it can't always be seen right away. The impact is cumulative and over time. And so, to circumstantially modify your habits every day, I think is very difficult. Obviously some like if it's, has to do with your schedule, how much time you need, that, maybe that can work, but I do think it mitigates against making that into a habit that, that you don't have to think so hard about.
Yeah. Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for listening, and please let us know if you have any thoughts, any suggestions in terms of discipline, and any questions in mortgage and the markets right now, and we will be filming again next week.